Welcome everybody to another episode of the Haunted Vermont podcast, and my name is Paul Doski. And tonight's special guest, well, you might know this guy because, well, he goes all over Vermont to talk about the Eddy Brothers, and he not only talks about them, but he's even working on a 3-book series, series we'll just say for now, and Jason can correct me. But anyway, Jason Smiley, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Glad to be on board and have a good chat about the Eddy Brothers.
Oh yeah, well, I know we talked about having you on for a while, technically, and we kind of been back and forth about talking about other things as well with your project. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to go see you in a event because, well, I've always had something come up on the weekend that you're doing like a guest thing, or like the pandemic hit and everything else. So it's been all over the place. But anyway, enough about that. Let's get down to you, because that's why you are here, right? And that is, for those that may not know who you are, can you please give us a brief bio of what you are and who you are?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Jason Smiley, and I was born and raised in Vermont. Been here all my life, and I've always had a fascination with paranormal things, particularly any paranormal stories that are based in Vermont or certainly even in other New England states, but certainly love the Vermont ones since I live here. And I've just always been interested in it. I've always loved, horror stories, that type of thing. And then as I got older, started to read some of the kind of collected works that are out there of just strange things in Vermont, and came to appreciate the work that Joe Citro has done. And one of, I think it was his first collection that he published, where I read about the Eddy Brothers, and really that was the sort of launching point for me, and I've just been fascinated with that story ever since I read it in Joe Citro's book.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Green Mountain's Unsolved Mysteries and something like that. Crime, maybe? Is that the one you're
Yeah,
thinking of?
yeah, it's like Green Mountain Ghosts and Ghouls, I think. I'm
Those
trying to.
schools and Unsolved Mysteries.
That's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
one. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was published around 1994, if
Yeah,
my
that
memory
sounds about
serves
right.
right. Yeah. I always get confused because I think it went like that book, and then it went Passing Strange, and
Hmm.
then it went Green Mountain Dark Tales or something like that.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's another good one too.
Yeah, and he's actually, Joe. I mean, there have been other people who have, touched on the story of the Eddy brothers, but Joe is really, kind of taken it to another level. And I know he's actually written about them, I think, in more than one of his books. I think
Yep.
it's, been one of his favorite stories as well. I've talked to him many times about the story.
Yeah, and not only did he like that one, but I know how much he loved, and I did it just kind of throw it off topic for a minute, but we all know how much he loved to talk about Emily's Bridge, right?
Yeah.
That's so funny though. But yes, he has mentioned the Eddy Brothers in about, oh God, I lost track. Maybe 4 or 5 of his books. Like, I think he mentioned a quote, something to the effect of, "It's Eddy Brothers isn't in it. Like, what type of book is it?" or something like that. It's kind of like the same idea with Emily Bridge. If you don't put Emily Bridge, it's not a Vermont story.
Yeah, it's funny, I feel like the Eddy brothers, they haven't gotten maybe as much attention as they should. You mentioned Emily's Bridge, then that's definitely one of the most popular, ghost stories based in Vermont. And the Eddy brothers, there's a few places that a few people that have written about them, but I feel in general, not a ton has been written about them. Joe probably has done the most work to this point. In each of the times he's written about them, he's given a little bit more info. He's certainly collected a lot of material over the years, newspaper articles, that type of thing. Talked to a lot of people, and like I said, for me, that was kind of a launching point to dig in even deeper than Joe has. But that was a great start for me.
So talk to us about it. Like, how has your journey been? Because like I mentioned, you're doing like a 3-book series, if I may say that. Otherwise, it's just not a series. What are you calling it?
Yeah, so it's a funny thing. I never ever ever set out to write a book about the Eddies. That was never something I had envisioned. Um, After I had read about Joe Citro's the work he had done on the Eddy Brothers, like I mentioned, it just always fascinated me, and I just sort of tucked that story in the back of my head. And then I was working for a bank. This was in about 1996, I would say, and there was a guy, and I wish I could remember his full name. I just remember his first name was Mike, and he had moved up here from Boston, and we were working together at this bank, and we got to talking about paranormal things in Vermont, spooky legends and so on. And he mentioned Honto's Cave. And he's like, "Oh yeah, have you ever been to Honto's Cave?" And I said, "No." And it didn't really ring any bells at the time when he mentioned it. And he's like, "Oh, I can't believe you've never been to Honto's Cave. That's the most haunted place in all of Vermont." And he told me this story about how him and some of his college buddies, they drove up here from Boston, and they drove all through Chittenden, Vermont, looking for Honto's Cave. And they asked some of the locals, and the locals that they talked to either didn't know where it was, or they knew where it was, but they wouldn't tell them. And they never did find it. And he was always bummed out by that. But it always intrigued me, and I couldn't for whatever reason, I had forgotten the name Honto's Cave. And so it kind of was eating away at me. And so I started digging into jokes to see if it was in there somewhere. And then I came across the Eddy Brothers story again, and I had read it before, but then I was like, oh, Cave, that's associated with Brother story. Now I remember it. And so when I reread Joe's work on the Eddy Brothers in that book that we mentioned earlier, The Green Mysteries, um, it just triggered something in me. I wanted to learn more. And at the same time, I was working with a lot of friends locally, just making independent film, nothing major by any means, making movies on, VHS camera. So, but I always thought, that would make such a cool story. And I was just fascinated, but never debunked I had read. So I started writing a screenplay. And the more I dug into it, the more I felt like I really wanted it to be as authentic as possible. I thought, if anyone ever fact checks, what's in the screenplay, there'll be like a source for it. But I wanted to see, how much of this was true. So I started doing a lot of digging, and it just became a big rabbit hole. The more I dug into it, the more information I found, and it just raised new questions. And I just kept digging, and before I knew it, years had gone by, and while I did complete my screenplay, it's not really in a place where I'm happy with it yet, to try and sell it, or even who knows, maybe even film it myself. I'm not sure if I would do that at this point in my life, but would certainly consider selling it to someone who's going to do it justice on the screen. But anyway, a long story short, so while I was compiling all this information, I'm collecting newspaper articles, and I've got thousands of newspaper articles. I've got copies of letters, correspondence between Harry Houdini and one of the Eddy brothers, Horatio Eddy. I've got photographs. I've got military records, education records, land records, funeral records, you name it. I've just compiled so much information, and I went down to the Chittenden Historical Society because I wanted to see what type of information they had in their files. And when I started going through everything, I realized I had most of the material that they had, plus way more than they had. And when the person I met there, her name was Karen Webster, she started looking at the material I had and was like, wow, you've got a lot of stuff here we don't have. And she said, do you think you would mind coming down and doing like a presentation or a lecture to our historical society? And they had just opened up like a Grange or something down there, and they were going to have me come down and do the speech there. I think this was in 2014. And I said, sure, not anything I'd ever thought about doing, any type of a lecture or presentation. But I said, sure, I'll put something together. So I did up a slideshow, and I went down there, I think it was April of 2014, and they got the biggest turnout for a Chittenden Historical Society meeting than they'd ever had before. There was like 70 something people packed into this big room. They were standing, in the back. There wasn't enough chairs, so you could tell just how much of an impact that story has on the town of Chittenden and some of the surrounding towns. The Rutland County area. That's a big story down there, and a lot of people were familiar with it. So I got up, did this speech, and just loved it. I mean, I love the story. I love talking about the story. I love hearing other people talk about the story and just kind of sharing what we know, what we've heard. And I heard things at that meeting I've never heard before, and I had a lot of information in my presentation that they had never heard. And I forget if it was like a hour and a half or 2 hour long presentation that I did. It was a little long probably, but I don't think anybody fell asleep, so I guess I did okay. But yeah, and then before you know it, other people, other historical societies caught wind of this and said, "Hey, we want to do like a Halloween spooky themed, historical speech. What do you think about doing it for our town?" And so I started doing it for the last few years. I've done, I don't know how many I've done total, but probably 4 or 5 a year at least, all throughout the state. I've done this presentation. I've modified it a little bit, and usually I end up doing like an hour-long version just to keep it a little bit tighter. And yeah, it's a blast. I love sharing it with people who've never heard the story. That's a lot of fun. And then hopefully the ones who have heard it, they get some information out of my speech that they've never heard before. So it's just a blast. And I haven't stopped. And then I started hearing from people who couldn't make the presentation. They couldn't attend for whatever reason, and the questions started coming up. Hey, they'd ask the people at the Historical Society, they say, do you know if he's going to be publishing a book on this? And I started getting that question more and more. And sort of like how I got into the whole speech thing, that was just not something I'd ever thought about. And at first I was like, well, I don't know if I want to share everything I know, because there's a lot of stuff I know that I haven't even told in my speeches, because I kind of want to leave some of it as a surprise in the screenplay. So I've been a little hesitant to sort of reveal everything. But then, as more time has gone on, I've gotten older and realized I'm probably never going to like direct it myself or film it myself. Maybe I'll, sell it to, somebody else, some other producer who wants to make it. But I thought, well, you know what? It's almost a little selfish of me not to publish the research and make it available for others, because if I don't, somebody else will do it eventually. But I'm pretty confident I have more material than anybody else. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I've got more than most, because a lot of the stuff I've told, people have just never heard before. I've never seen it written anywhere before. So I thought, maybe I will publish a book. And then when I did start putting that together, and before I knew it, I realized there's no way I'm going to be able to fit everything into one book. It's just not possible. There's that much material. Yes, I could edit it all down to just the bare bones, but I don't know. There's just something in me that feels like I'd be holding back too much by not, putting it all out there. And who knows? Maybe I'll publish the first book and it won't sell that well, and no one will buy the second or third one. But ultimately, I decided, yeah, you know what? There's definitely too much for one. So I'm going to do one volume, which is going to be called The Devil's Cabinet, which is coincidentally, or not coincidentally, the same name as my screenplay. And it's going to be focused on the early years of the Eddy Brothers. And by the early years, I mean when they were younger, in their 20s, and traveling around the United States doing this spirit cabinet exhibition, which we can talk more about later if you want. And then there's a lot of material there that's never been written about. There's some information that's been published out there that's just wrong about those years. And then the second volume is called Spirit Vale, which is what that area of Chittenden was called back in the late 1800s. I think the first place, I believe it was the New York Times that first called it Spirit Vale, but it could have been the New York Sun or the Daily Graphic, I forget. But one of those is the first place I've ever seen it called Spirit Vale, and it kind of stuck with me, and I thought that'd be a great name for the second volume. And that'll focus on the same kind of time period when Colonel Olcott, who wrote People from the Other World, that he visited there. And I feel like that's the time when the Eddies were really at their peak and became most famous. You know, people were coming from all over the world to Chittenden, Vermont to visit these guys and see their seances or circles. And then the third volume in the series, if I do get to that far, would be sort of what happened after, because that's a question I get a lot. Is, well, what happened to the Eddy brothers? Did they just sort of fade away? Like, what became of them? And then there's been a lot of stories in more recent times. Long after the Eddies had died, I've heard different stories of things that have happened at the property where the house was, which is now the High Life Ski Club Lodge. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories that I can include from more modern times that maybe aren't specific to the Eddies, but are specific to that area, which I think would be fun to talk about.
All right. Well, that again has so much of like me trying to say, okay, let me touch on this, but I mean,
Yeah, I
so
just threw a lot of info at you there.
no, that's fine. That's fine. That's why I love doing that. But so the first thing I want to say is when the time does come, Jason, for the 3 volumes to come out, and I'm pretty sure you'll be around to complete this. I'm pretty sure you're doing a great job from what I know. So from the first thing I'd like to know too, if you already know, but so do you have an idea already of how many like pages do you want to do for each book, or is it like kind of one of those where you got to juggle it? Like what you were just talking about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have like a set number of pages I'm focused on. I can tell you that the books will be thick, right? If you look at if you look at the People from the Other World, which is the book by Colonel Henry Olcott, which tells all about the Eddy brothers and his experience with them in 1874, I would say that each volume will probably be that thick. They're going to be definitely big books. They're not some thin thing, because I've got a lot of material, and to be honest, I will have to do some editing. I mean, there's some stories that
Obviously, yeah.
are interesting, but aren't
Not
noteworthy
worth
enough to
doing,
include.
yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want to bore people. You know what I mean? So, um, so yeah. But one of the funny things that a story I'd heard about the Eddies was there was this one time that they were arrested in Syracuse, New York. I forget what the charge was off the top of my head, but I think it was basically for jugglery, which was like entertaining without a license. The townspeople in Syracuse thought they were frauds, and so the police arrested them. But what was funny was Horatio. When in his correspondence with Harry Houdini, he talked about that experience, and the other thing that he said in that letter when he was describing was that there were so many stories about the Eddy family, and that if they were to put all their stories in a book, like it would be 6 inches thick. And it cracks me up because he's not wrong. If I took all the material and I publish it all into the 3 volumes, it probably will be about 6 inches thick between the 3 of them.
No, that's fair enough. But so we're probably looking at then somewhere around 500 pages. I want to say per book. Then if that's what we're going to be looking at.
It could be. You know what? It depends. Like, I guess it depends on the font size too. I could make
And
the font really small
yeah,
and make the
that's
make the
true.
books thinner. But I know Joe has. He's always said, I should consider making the font like a larger size, because there are some, especially older audience, who may not have as good of a vision, that it works better for them if it's a larger font. But we'll have to see. I'm probably going to publish through Amazon, self-publish. I don't have a publisher at this point. I'm going to self-publish, and we'll have to see what the cost is at the end, because if it ends up being a $50 book because of the number of pages, I'm certainly not thinking I'm going to make any kind of money off of this. I think I mentioned in my email to you that I've spent so much money on time, research, materials, that I'll probably never make back any money. If I'd be lucky if I broke even, and I'm totally okay with that because I love the story that much. I really do. Yeah, making money is not what I set out to do. At least in terms of the book. Maybe if I sold a screenplay, maybe I can make some money. But the books, I really don't feel like I'm going to make a ton of money, and I'm totally fine with it. But I'm hoping that at the end of the day, when I tally it up in Amazon, that it doesn't show that I'm going to have to charge people $50 per book. I really don't know at this point. I'm sure it depends, what the page length is and all that. I know one thing I do wish about Amazon is they don't offer like if you're going to self-publish through them, they don't offer like a hardcover version, which is really too
They do
bad. I'd
now.
love to see it in hardcover. But there's another company, Lulu.com, Lulu, which I could do it through them and do a hardcover, but we'll see. That's something I'll worry about when it's publishing time, I guess.
Actually, Amazon now has a beta version for hardcovers now.
Oh, they do. That's really good to know. That changes the game for me because I'd like to even if I only printed one copy, like in hardcover for myself, I would totally do that. But
And
I'd love to be able to make it available for others.
honestly, so if you want my opinion on either Amazon or Woo, I would
Mhm.
actually go with Woo just for
Mm.
one reason only. Um, you can actually put your book out not only to Amazon through Woo, but Barnes and Nobles and other places, as where
Oh.
Amazon is only strictly Amazon.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of things. So one thing about Lulu I've heard was that some people have said like formatting your book is not as easy to do in Lulu, versus Amazon. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't tried it. And then I have heard that about like Amazon. Like if you publish through Amazon, a lot of like local independent stores won't carry the book. They
And
just
that's
won't.
what happened with Joe.
Yeah,
I
which is
don't know if you
unfortunate. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's what happened to Joe, and I think it happened to Robert actually. Which I'm not going to name what bookstore it was, but yeah.
Yeah. It's really sad too because, on the one hand, I totally get it. The smaller independent bookstores, it's hard for them to compete, with Amazon. I totally get that. But at the same time, geez, I want to be able to make the book available, at the local level without having to just bring a box of books, that I paid for myself through Amazon to try to sell. But yeah, well, that's good to know, though. Definitely good feedback for me to what you said about Lulu. I'll have to keep that in mind as I get closer and figure out what the right choice is.
So not to go off topic for a minute, but just to help you out too is so I published my books through Woo,
Hmm.
and the process wasn't that bad, but I do wish that the making the cover had a little bit more uh advantage of seeing what was going to get cut off versus having to buy
Oh,
a proof copy and then have to go back to fix it.
oh, yeah, like a better like preview option or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I haven't used Lulu in a couple years, so they could have actually fixed that. So
Mm,
I love the quality of Lulu. So um, but Amazon is good too, But
yeah.
it all depends on the format you want, what type of paper you want as well.
Hmm.
So if
Yeah.
you want like a nice clean paper, we'll offer that. Otherwise, if you want something that feels like it's gonna rip, the Amazon kind of has that. So,
Mm, yeah.
and I'm not trying to like batch Amazon because I
Hmm.
mean, people got to work with what you get, and what they
Yeah.
want to do. So I
Right.
mean, um, the only thing too with Amazon is you don't need a proof copy. You can just
Mm,
up and just put it out there,
yep.
While Lulu, you could do. They basically say before you dispute it to like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and whatever else it goes to, um, they basically want you to get a proof copy.
Hmm.
But that one proof copy is what's gonna make you go, I love it, I love the quality, whatever. The quantity is just one book. You pay it, you receive it. If you like it, then you hit that button and there you go.
Yep.
It'll be everywhere. and then next thing
Yeah.
you know, in 2 weeks it'll be on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
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 So
Good
that
to
would
know.
be my yeah. So that would just be my 2 cents, and I can even talk to you about it even later on when you are really trying to push it out too as well.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So I want to touch on a couple things that you said, and that is you mentioned Honto's Cave. I actually
Yeah.
had a friend of mine a long time ago when I first started Haunted Vermont, where he was telling me that his mother's friend or his mother. It's been a while, so don't quote me. And anyway, she this uh, either the mom or the friend. We'll just say friend for right now. But she supposedly attended one of these seances or something like that of what the Eddy did at Honto's Cave. So she knew exactly where it was and stuff. And I've actually had a couple people reach out to me to tell me, "Oh, I know where Honto's Cave is, and I'll gladly show it to you." But I never hear back, and it's always like, "Well, crap," because it's kind of cool. But then later on, I get told from people where to look, but unfortunately, it's by a place that is private property, and it looks like this place had nobody there, and then from what I hear, the house that is like by the area of Honto's Cave is like a vacation home. So it's like you can trespass if you really want to, but it's like I'd rather wait and know that there's somebody there before I just go sneaking around somebody's backyard.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought this topic up about Honto's Cave. So let me tell you what I can tell you about that. I have been to Honto's Cave twice in my life, and both times they were by permission, with permission of the property owner who does have a house on that property. Um, what I can tell you is that one day I was contacted by that property owner, and he said, "Hey, there's a couple guys that were sleeping, camping out on our property. Do you know anything about this?" And I was like, "No." And he said, "Oh yeah, they knew all about like the Eddy Brothers stuff or whatever." And they told the property owner, "Oh yeah, we go up there, we go camp, we come camping here every year." And the owners, were kind of startled by this, and I think they ended up, saying, "Okay, well, you guys can finish your night camping here, but please don't come back." So as a result, I've been in conversation over the years with the property owner, and he's had too many incidents up there. People trespassing, and they go up there. They four wheel. They target practice with firearms, and it's gotten to the point where they don't want anybody up there at all. Like they don't even want people contacting them asking for permission. They're super nice people, don't get me wrong, but they've kind of shut the whole thing off, and it's unfortunate that other people have kind of ruined it for everybody. um, I think in the past, I know that the Chittenden Historical Society used to do like a hike up there. Like, I don't think it was every year, but maybe every couple, like 2 or 3 years, they'd have a hike and go up there. I don't even think that's going to happen anymore, just because like I said, the too many people have trespassed on the property, and I think they'd rather kind of avoid that at this point. And I can't blame them. Yeah, it's not fun. Like when you have people coming on your property, you don't know who they are, you don't know what they're doing there, and so I definitely don't blame them at all. So yeah, I always tell people, because I have people ask me that too all the time. They say, "Well, where is Honto's Cave?" And I say, "Well, I know where it is, but I can't tell you." And unfortunately, I can't even share the name of the property owner, because they just prefer not to be contacted at this point. And I totally respect that. It's hard because I know people are fascinated by the location and the story, but yeah, they just don't want it right now.
Yeah, exactly. And like as you just said it ruined it for everybody. It's just like
Yep,
Emily's Bridge a couple of years ago.
exactly.
I think they calmed down on it now, and but it took a couple years though with Emily's Bridge. But I want to say they're not as hard on Emily's Bridge now if you go there after night anymore, like they were back when this incident did happen. But same thing, you got these crazy people that are out drinking, go to Emily's Bridge, they're shouting, hollering, causing a racket, and next thing you know, the neighbor got to call the police, and then it just gets ruined for everybody.
Yeah, in fact, I saw that happen firsthand. I've been to Emily's Bridge, not too many times, maybe 3 or 4 times, and one of those times, and this was before the town kind of had to crack down on people visiting after dark, and I went there with my wife and daughter, and I got out of the car just to kind of walk around and kind of experience the bridge in the darkness. And yeah, there were drunk people just wandering around, and I'm thinking, and one of them even like bumped, like intentionally came up and bumped into me, and I was like, wow, okay. So I didn't stay around there long. I was like, wow, this isn't really fun at all. And of course, when you think of a place like that and you want to explore it, you hope you're going to be the only one there, right? And you get to kind of experience the spookiness. But when you get all these people, they're loud, they're drunk, and I'm like, well, this stinks. And then yeah, it wasn't long after that the neighbors started complaining, and the town had to crack down. And it's really, yeah, just like we said, it's a shame that others have to ruin it for everybody. But I guess that's the life we live now, right?
Tell me about it. I'm lucky that I was like you. I was able to experience Emily Bridge before that happened, which, in my honest opinion, I think they should have bumped up the fine like more than what it was. Because if memory serves right, they were like only charging a $25 fee for being there at night. It's like, really, that's it? It's like, I'd just rather just get the fine and just be like, okay, whatever, But that's not me. I'm not trying to encourage people that, but I'm just saying, like,
Right.
$5, like that's it. Like maybe make it $500, Like,
Yeah.
then people won't want to stay.
Right.
But yeah, that's the speaking of like getting things ruined. I don't know how many times I've upset somebody messaging Haunted Vermont to ask where this like specific location is, or like even with like a hidden cemetery or cemeteries in general. Because I posted some interesting hidden graves before, but it's like I don't know you. I don't know if you're just gonna go there and destroy, and then
Right.
how is that gonna look?
Yep. Well, even at Honto's Cave that we were talking about earlier, with the first time I went, again with permission from the homeowner, I had reported back to him, because he asked me, how did everything look back there, and I said, yeah, it was really cool. It was neat, but there was spray paint on some of the cave, and it's not really a cave. It's just two giant boulders, sort of leaning together. They're huge, but someone had spray painted, and it just it's just, you hate to see that, and it's really difficult to kind of clean that stuff off, and yeah, it just ruins it. And getting back like specifically to the Eddies, I've heard of several instances where people have vandalized the gravestones here in some of the Vermont cemeteries where they're buried, in Chittenden, and also there's a cemetery in New York where one of the sisters is buried, in Moravia, New York, and that cemetery had some vandals ruin things there too. Yeah, it's really sad.
Wow. Yeah, that's like I'm trying to remember the name of the cemetery. It's in Pittsburgh. I want to say it's like the Whipple Hall Cemetery.
Hmm.
Anyway, it's not that big, but it is weird where it is. And what I mean by that is like it's almost like on a side road, but then like as you're pulling up to where the cemetery is, you gotta take a left, and it's like right there, but then you're also right by somebody's house.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't feel like I'm trespassing, but like at the same time, it's like if they were to come over and be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" or whatever, I'll just be like, "Hey, I'm just here to see who's buried here because that's just who I am. I love to see like who I can find that's buried here. If it's anybody interesting that I've heard about, like oh God, I can't remember his name, but he's buried there. I think it's like, the Whipple Hollow guy. I can't think of his name right now, but
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I can't think of it either, but yeah, I totally know what you mean. It's tough. Like I know you also have an interest in like paranormal investigation, and I have some family members who I have a sister, and her husband at the time, and her two sons. They used to be really into that and go to different places in Vermont that were allegedly haunted, and they would do investigations with cameras and
yeah.
audio video equipment. And it's tough because I see they were good about it and always got permission and stuff, but I see a lot of people who go to like abandoned property, and they go in and investigate, and yeah, you got to be careful because while a piece of property might be abandoned, someone still owns that property. And if you're there without permission, especially if you're going inside a building, whether it's abandoned or not, it's you might get a charge with trespassing, or even breaking and entering. I don't know, but yeah, I just hate to see people do that. Like I feel like it's like one of those ethical things that sometimes like ghost hunters and paranormal investigators, they don't talk about enough. Like you should always get permission, preferably written permission, so in case like cops show up in the middle of the night because they got a report there's flashlights going through the building, that you could say, oh yeah, I've got permission from the owner, here's their phone number, here's a written paper, or even give the cops a heads up ahead of time and say, hey, just letting we're going in this building after dark, we've got permission, so if anybody calls this in, we've got permission.
Well, police is also a good way of getting permission as well, because they're going to know the owners, when you're
Right,
actually.
right.
And I'm going to touch on a couple things actually. So, one of the things I just want to quickly say while it's on my brain is you mentioned written permission.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I've recently added to hauntedvermont.org is forms. And one of the forms I have that you can print, or you can download the PDF file of and print it out from your printer or whatever, is a permission slip, basically. It's basically you filling it out and then you give it to the owner and they sign it off, and that's a good
Yeah.
way of keeping your records, and
Mm-hmm.
there's your written permission, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there, and for anybody interested too, I'll throw the link in the episode description for the form. So if you guys are interested, check it out. There's different kinds of forms too. So the other thing too is I want to say another thing that we haven't really said yet either, which is, well, you said the name, but I'll put it more into of the Eddy Brothers house, or the homestead, we'll just say, per it being now owned by people from New Jersey, which is called High Life Ski Lodge.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the privilege twice of being invited inside and checking it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say, like, so I've heard stories where I've said that I've gotten permission and whatever, and I've heard people go to bang on the door of High Life Ski Lodge and basically like asking if they can come in to see the place because yada yada yada, and then it's like, and then you're wondering why you're getting yelled at, for one.
Mm.
But two, it's like, well, if you're not going there to be respectful, and you're just going there to basically bang on the door just to be like, "Can you let me in?" It's like, well, no wonder why I wouldn't want to let you in either. But I just want to say, but for the two times that I was able to go in there, the first time was a older couple. They were so nice. And all I was there for originally was a couple of my friends were just to take some pictures outside of the house, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But they came out and they're like, "Hey, come on inside," like, and it's like, "You sure?" Like, I don't want to be like rude to you guys. Like, I mean, I appreciate that you're letting us, take pictures, but yeah, they did not mind. They even offered us drinks and stuff, and they showed us around. Unfortunately, though, the couple did not know which room up there was supposedly the circle room,
Mm-hmm.
so I had no idea. But otherwise, all I'm going to say is the owners now have done so much with that place that it looks phenomenal. And I'm actually kind of glad of what great condition this place is even in.
So, geez, there's so much to talk about. So, a few things about the High Life Ski Club Lodge. The first thing I should say, full disclaimer, I'm actually a member of the High Life Ski Club. Now, having said that, I actually don't get down there very much. I'm not a skier. I'm not a snowboarder. Um, and it's actually important to, I should say, just a little advertisement for them. That's not all they do. You know, they actually do a lot of other, like hiking and canoeing and kayaking. Uh, so the very first time I ever went down there, it was on one of my many, many, many trips. I live in northern Vermont, and at least once, if not twice a year, I go down to Chittenden just to be down there, visit the Eddy graves, stop by the lodge. And the very first time that I went to the lodge. There was nobody there, but I went to the end of the driveway and just took some pictures and was kind of chicken. And then the next time I went, there was maybe not too many people there. There was like maybe 4 or 5 people there, and I was kind of chicken. And I'm like, well, maybe they'll let me come in, or at least just let me walk around the outside and take some pictures. And I went up and just told them who I was, and that at the time I was working on a screenplay. I hadn't yet, done like the full on research for like the book, but or I should say books. But they were probably the same couple that you talked to. They were so nice. They let me come in, gave me a tour of the place, told me all about, not just the house, the lodge, but about the club, and just, super friendly people. A lot of fun. They're people who enjoy life, absolutely. And so over time, I've actually done actually 3 presentations for them about the Eddy family. One I did in person. They had like a spooky weekend around Halloween time. So that was like just the ultimate honor for me, really. I went down and did this presentation, and I spent the night there. I spent the night there one time. I've been down, several times, and then a couple of years ago, right when the pandemic, the first year of it, 2020, I actually, was thinking, well, you know what? I go down at least once a year anyway. I might as well just become a member, and I can be sort of the lodge historian, as sort of my role there, even though I don't get down there much. And so yeah, I became a member, and I've still done a couple more presentations. Although the past couple of years they've been through like Zoom meetings, just for the members. And yeah, they are just an amazing group of people. Like, and it's funny, even though I've only been down there a few times and kind of hung out with them at like their Halloween parties, they've just been really welcoming to me. And I love hanging out with them, and I consider all the ones I've met like real friends. And yeah, I get kind of back to your point. I'm sure they get a ton of people, the ones who hear about the story and maybe you're driving through Vermont and they want to drive by and take pictures of the house, that type of thing. And I think respect is definitely the key thing. Luckily, they got a couple things going on that hopefully will deter the bad people. They have they have a security system, so that'll keep people out. And B, if you believe the story of the Eddy family, the place is haunted. Who would want to break into like a real haunted house, right? They have the ultimate security system. But just a great place. But the interesting thing about that house, and this won't be anything new to people who've attended some of my speeches, is that the original house, the Eddy homestead, was actually torn down in 1898, and I have evidence to back that up. So the house that you see today is different. Now, I don't know, because we don't have that much information, but I don't know if maybe they used some of the original materials in the new house. But the original house absolutely was torn down. Maybe the foundation is the same. That's possible too. There's also some reports about pieces of the house being moved across the street to another house where Horatio moved. And we do know that Horatio lived in one of the houses across the street. Horatio actually owned several properties in Chittenden. But he lived in a house across the street, and some say that he took the whole circle room with him to that house. But there's nothing now that like backs that up. I've even been in that other house, and with with the current owners, and there's nothing that jumps out that's like. In fact, there was one room that I was like, wow, that looks like it could have been the circle room, and then they told me, oh yeah, that section of the house was actually added on in like the 70s or something like that. So I was like, oh shoot, well I guess that it ruins that theory. Um, but what's funny is even if this is all true that the house was torn down in 1898, I've talked to a lot of people that have still had experiences in the lodge. So I don't discount those experiences in any way. And I've heard all kinds of stories, of people having weird experiences near Honto's Cave, weird experiences in the cemeteries that are near the property, where the Eddies are buried, Horton Cemetery and Baird Cemetery. And there's another cemetery on the other side where the sister, Mary Eddy Huntoon, is buried. Lots of just great stories. And that's the type of thing I would include in my third book, sort of modern experiences that people have had on those properties. But yeah, it's a wild story, and I think that you and I kind of talked about this a little bit when we were chatting recently about the story about the house. Some people say the house turned like 90 degrees, and I've heard different versions of the story. One version says that it was during a seance, the house rotated 90 degrees, or some people say after the seance or the next day, like they woke up and the house had rotated. And man, I love that story. No matter how just ridiculous it is, I love it. It's just the coolest thing. And I wish I could trace like where that originated from. It's just so much fun. But what I suspect happened here, I suspect that somebody started looking at the like sketches in Colonel Olcott's book. And they looked at, in the road, the Chittenden Road, where the house is and where the lodge is today on that property. And they're like, something doesn't line up here. The front of that house is different. And I've heard some people say, oh, well, there was a flood, or there's been a couple floods. And maybe they had to change the direction of the road because of the flooding. And that's why it doesn't go in front of the house anymore. But that's not true either, because I've actually talked with somebody in the Vermont Archaeological Society who took, he attended one of my speeches, and he took one of the old maps and overlaid it with like a modern map of the area, like a satellite photo. And absolutely nothing's changed about Chittenden Road. It's where it's always been, going back to that time period in the 1800s. And the only thing I can think of is, the house, when it was torn down, when they rebuilt it with the house on that property, it faced a different direction. And I just think when people look at it now, they're like, wow, something weird happened there. Why is it different? And they just maybe made this story up, which is just the most fun story. But I always say this when people, kind of press me on it. I say, well, if that story was true, I can promise you that story would have made the newspaper. It would have been in the Rutland Herald. It probably would have made the New York Times if a house rotated 90 degrees, after a seance. There's no documentation of that. And I wish there was. I wish it was a true story, but I just think that's just a fun, piece of folklore that just is great. I love it.
Yeah, and to touch on that story is, so what I'm gonna add to this is, so when I first heard of this story, of course, me being the investigator, I'm like, all right, let's see how this would even work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's just see. So my first approach to the house is looking like as it is now. Is you get that tree right out front there,
Mm-hmm.
but if you look at the old the old
Like
photograph,
the sketches, yeah. Or the
uh,
photos, yeah. There's some photos too.
yep. And even High Life Ski Lodge should even have these old photos as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, this is just going to be me guessing because I really don't know unless Jason knows, but he can correct me afterwards. So anyway, as you're looking at this old photograph, it's almost like the front door is right there, that it would be facing the road, which is where the single tree is.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
so if we were to look at this story of it turning 90 degrees to the right or left, basically, if you're facing the house from there,
Mm-hmm.
is, so that's obviously not going to be possible because of the way it got turned anyway. So I
Right.
don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just a fun story, but yeah, I just can't sort of line it all up. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't know either. But anyway, it's just like you said, it's a fun little story and stuff like that.
Mhm,
Going back to what you were saying too is when you were visiting and hearing these stories, it's kind of funny because the old couple that I had stories too. They were saying like, yeah, it feels like some of the members were saying that they've been definitely had visitors or like at least had signs of which like the Eddy brothers are like still around
mhm.
because one of the stories they told me, and it might be similar to what you've heard, and I'd like to kind of hear some of the stories you have heard as well. But when people were coming down the stairs, which I don't remember where the stairs are, but because it's just been a couple years since I've last been in there. But they were saying like somebody felt like they were gonna fall from the stairs, and it felt like something invisible, like an invisible hand, caught them from
Hmm.
falling, almost like grabbing a hold of the back of the shirt so they wouldn't fall and like just catching their balance and stuff like that. And it's just like to me that's kind of cool to hear because it's just like it's like clearly if it is, and I'm assuming it is the Eddy brothers watching over uh everybody really, is that like of course they're being respectful, which we've mentioned before, and if you're respectful, you're gonna get the good medicine. That I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I've definitely heard a few tales of some of the members that are part of the lodge, and also guests that have been there visiting that have experienced different things. Dark figures, that type of thing. Children laughing. When there's no children there. Just some really fun stories, and definitely a feeling, footsteps, the sounds of footsteps and things like that. And to their knowledge, they were the only one there, but they hear somebody walking up the stairs, and they just assume it's like another club member, and it turns out
Remember or
there's
something? Yep.
yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah, I've heard a lot of those kind of stories, which are they're just a lot of fun. And like I said before, I never discount what anybody says, because everybody has their own experience, and if you're not there to sort of be a witness or not, it's not my place to judge. And I've certainly seen and heard interesting things in my life that I can't explain. And so I absolutely would never say, oh, that didn't happen, or that's not real, because you just don't know. I think there's a lot of things in this world we can't explain. But yeah, that house, yeah, it's tough to say. If any of those types of activities, is it the Eddies themselves, or is it the house was owned by other people after the Eddies. It was sold a couple of times at least, and if people had died in the house, is it their spirits? It's tough to say what that could
Huh.
be. But the one thing I would say is, and this is, by the way, just me talking right now. I'm not like a club, High Life Ski Club representative speaking, right now. Um, I would say, they probably they're super nice, like I said before, and
I can
it is
tell.
like a yeah, and it's a functional lodge. They have people staying there, to enjoy their time. It's like a little mini vacation to get away and do some things outdoors. And I would guess they probably don't want like a full on, like, hey, we're gonna rent the house out for a week to like a ghost hunting team or something like that, and have people like they don't know just like going through the house and stuff like that. But I don't know. But I would guess that's probably not what they're looking for. They probably aren't too interested in people going in with like a Ouija boards and stuff like that. It's like, you don't want to poke the bear, right?
No, no. And no, not like I'm trying to cut you off, but like
Yeah.
I can vouch that so much. Like even when me and this other uh person, everybody might remember him as Chad. I forget how you pronounce his last name, but
Oh, yeah. He had like the
Vermont.
obscure Vermont. Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, me and him actually got together one time to do like this event outside, which we were calling it picking the bones, and it was like in Chittenden because supposedly it was where like this old town or something where it was called like New Boston and something
Oh
where
yeah.
they were. So it was like in the back road behind Green Mountain Inn, but it was
Hmm.
also somewhere around where those weird hidden graves are of memory served me right, Nathan Wheeler. Anyway, don't quote me on that either. Anyway, but yeah, supposedly there's old foundation there and everything, and which would sort of make sense because if these random two gravestones are where out in the middle of nowhere here, then yeah, I mean there maybe was an old uh town, whatever you want to call it, but we'll just say civilization, really.
Hmm.
But anyway, as we were going there, uh, I saw somebody outside the High Life Ski Lodge, and I looked at the time, and I'm just like, you know what, we got a few minutes to kill. Um, let's have them. Let's pull into the High Life Ski Lodge, and let's just let them take a couple pictures because this is their first
Hmm.
time ever being here. So and so we roll in and we turn around in the driveway and stuff, and I like get out and I saw the guy that was behind the house that was coming towards us who was raking the leaves, and I just went up to him and I'm like, hey, I hope you don't mind. We just don't want to be here quick. We just want to take a couple pictures because they've never seen the Eddy house before, and then we'll be on our way. And they're like, oh, well, in that case, if you guys got time, let's give you a tour. So like it's just a matter of your energy, making sure you're showing respect, and just appreciating the fact that you're even getting the chance to even take a picture.
Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. And that's the cool thing. Like, not only have everybody I've met from the High Life Ski Club Lodge, from the club, they are friendly, but I think they have like a healthy respect for the property and for because obviously for them that's their lodge. Like they want it to be in good shape. They want people to want to come there and spend their time there and enjoy themselves. But also they have like a healthy respect for the story about the Eddies and sort of the historical significance of the property. So they take everything in stride, and I think that they recognize that people are interested in that, and they're going to stop by, they're going to take pictures, and yeah, I think as long as people are being like respectful, they're going to sort of mirror that back to them. They just are a great group of people.
Yeah, and I mean, back to like the first time I ever went in there, as I just want to mention that even they allowed me and my couple friends to sign the guest book that they
Oh
had.
yeah, yeah.
So my name is forever logged in that guest book of whichever year it was. So,
Yeah,
or
that's awesome.
so that's the type of like the small things like that. I just feel honored. It's
Hmm.
like I was able to go in there. I was even able to write my name in the guest book. Like that stuff will be there for years to come, even
Yep.
after I'm dead. So, well, let's hope anyway. I mean, I would hope so. But
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, just the fact of that, it's just amazing. But anyway, we
yeah.
could probably keep going with
I
that.
know, I know.
Um, actually, real quick question. I actually want to ask you because you said you're a member of that, so it's really interesting because at the time, I thought I only heard that it was only available for people in New Jersey. So it must have seemed like they um changed it, I guess.
Well, I can tell you, I don't know what the like ratio of like New Jersey members versus non-New Jersey members is, but I can say that I know they've got members from all over the country that may not don't come out here a ton, but they come out can, and I think there's some members from Vermont. I think probably this is just a guess. Probably the bulk of the people that are members are from New Jersey, and usually when they have like their club meetings, they meet. They used to meet like right down in New Jersey, but more recently, the past couple of years, they actually do the club meetings online. They still now that things have kind of opened back up. The pandemic has improved things a little bit with the numbers declining with COVID. They've started to have some in-person meetings again down in New Jersey, but they do still have some online ones. but yeah, I think probably the bulk of the people are from New Jersey. So yeah, I think the membership is open, um, to whoever wants to become a member. Obviously there's a fee for that, and it's you can't just stay there just because you're a member. Like, you have to like sign up and pay additional cost to like stay for a weekend or whatever, however long. And there's always, there's people there like all year round, doing
Yep.
different activities. I think a lot of people think like, oh, they're just a ski club. They just are
No, they
only,
do everything like you were saying.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
And
yep.
and I have to. I hope it's still there, and you could probably even probably tell me. But one of the things I loved about that place is the what do they call it? The broken bone meter. I think that's what they called it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I vaguely remember. Yeah.
I thought that was kind of funny, but it was so cool looking too. Like that little meter of like who had the most broken bones or something like that. That was amazing. Um, but going back to what you're saying, if the new place is built with maybe some of the old materials, I want to say the
Mm.
couple that I had told me that there was a possibility that
Hmm.
some of the stuff was good, but now that years have gone by, who knows anymore?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, at a minimum, at a bare minimum, I'm confident that like the materials you see there, like a lot of them, like there's these big heavy like wooden beams inside and the fireplace. At a bare minimum, those were built there in 1898. Even if they were all new material, I'm confident that stuff is original to 1898. But prior to that, I think in Colonel Olcott's book, it said that the house was like the I forget, like the oldest or second oldest building. I think it was the oldest two-story building in Chittenden when the Eddys bought it. So that place was already old back in the mid 1800s when they moved there from Clarendon. So it's been around a long, long time, that property, and it used to be a much bigger piece of property, by the way. And then it got kind of, when things kind of fell apart with the family, they sold off different parts of it to different parts of the family, and then even outside the family eventually.
Anyway, yeah, I was just trying to remember because they shared so much information too, but while trying to offer us a drink, and it's like, we're good. I'm driving, so I'm good. But they were a great couple. I hope they're still around. I can't
Yeah,
remember
if
their
it's the
name.
same couple that I met with the very first time, I think they're still there. Because yeah, they just were super nice. I mean, really, they
Did they
let me
always
come
offer
in.
you a drink?
Yeah, they offered like a sandwich, I think, too, and I was like, oh, this was like too much. Like they were too kind. I was like, wow, they
Yeah,
literally just met me. They didn't know who I am, and they let me
and
come
they're
in. They let
already
me like take some pictures, and yeah, I was really
yeah.
just blown away by their hospitality. And I was like,
Oh
wow,
my god, I couldn't
these people
believe
are really
their
cool.
hospitality.
Yep.
Oh man. So a couple things that I have on my note that we wanted to discuss too,
Yeah.
before moving forward is so somewhere in the news article, and I forget which article I found it on because I was just trying to browse it, and it might be in an old one. But anyway, so I think it might be the newspaper's fault or something. But they mentioned how the Eddies basically turned that homestead into supposedly the Green Tavern
Hmm.
Inn.
Yeah. So yeah, I have not 100% certainty tracked down the origin of the connection between the Eddy Brothers and the Green Mountain Tavern, or Green Mountain. Yeah, I think it was the Green Mountain Tavern, or the Green Tavern, maybe I think it was called. And I think the first place I saw it mentioned was in like a 1976 newspaper article. I think it was like Burlington Free Press, and it mentioned that. And I've seen that also in a couple of different books that talk about the Eddy story. So I've always been kind of interested in that, because when I started doing really deep research and looking at the newspaper articles and land records and all these things, there's no mention of this Green Tavern. So I have talked to people at the Chittenden Historical Society, and what I learned is there was a piece of, there was a building called the Green Tavern, and it was in a different part of town. It had nothing to do with the Eddies. So I think there's some confusion there. And now, when the Eddies purchased the property, when the father Zephaniah purchased the property in like 1844 or 46. I forget the exact year. I think Colonel Olcott says they moved there in 1846, but if I recall correctly, the actual land record, he purchased the land in like 1844, and I might have the dates off by like a year or two. But he, you know, in Colonel Olcott's book, it said that it used to be a wayward inn, I think is how he described it in People from the Other World, that book. So it refers to it as, a long time ago, it was an inn before they bought that property. So we know it was an inn then, but it was not the Green Tavern. That's a completely separate part of town. And then when the Eddys started inviting people to come visit them in Chittenden, starting in the 1870s or so, um, it basically operated like an inn, but it's not like they advertised it like, hey, come stay at the inn. It was more like, people were coming there to visit them, to go to the seances, or the circles as they called them. And they would pay money. They would never pay money to attend the seance at the house, but they were paying to stay there for the food and the room. But they never really referred to it as an inn in any of the newspaper articles or other literature that I've read. So this Green Tavern, I think, is someone read about the Green Tavern being in Chittenden and maybe made an assumption that that was also the Eddy property, and to my knowledge, it's not.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And also back to what we were trying to think of, or I think it was how Henry first heard about the Eddies.
Mhm.
If this is right, the first hand to call of Henry Olcott, it was a reporter for the New York Daily Graphic. So I'm wondering if somewhere around the New York Daily is where he basically heard about the Eddy Brothers.
So actually, how Colonel Olcott heard about the Eddys, he heard about them in one of the spiritualist publications at the time, and this was in 1874. And pretty sure the one that he read about them was the Banner of Light, was one of the most, if not the most, popular spiritualist publication at the time. And he read about them. This was probably like July or August of 1874, and he was fascinated by the story. Because see, the thing about the Eddys was, they had been somewhat well known prior to the 1870s. They were traveling around the U.S. mostly the Northeast, and they were doing this spirit cabinet routine, or exhibition, where what they would do was they would get like a town hall. Their manager would start putting up flyers, handing out brochures, telling people, come check out this spirit exhibition, or human magnetism, or mesmerism, or whatever they advertised at the time, human electricity. They use a lot of different terms, and so they'd get people there, and they'd have this spirit cabinet, which is basically like a giant, like a wardrobe, a big box, and they would have the audience look it over, make sure there was nothing, no trap doors, that type of thing. And they would tie up the brothers and also one of the sisters. And the brothers were William and Horatio, and one of the sisters was Mary. There was actually like 11 kids total, but those three were kind of the primary ones doing these exhibitions. And they would tie up a couple of them, have them go inside the cabinet, and they would put in like instruments and things like that inside there with them, and then they'd close the doors. And usually they'd have volunteers from the audience, from the town. They would try to get people who were well known in the town, respected, people of integrity, but also people who knew how to tie knots, sailors, carpenters. And they would tie them up, and they'd say, yep, they're firmly tied up, there's no way they're getting out of these. So they'd close the doors, they'd be tied up inside the box, and then no sooner would those doors be closed than like the musical instruments would start playing, the ones that they had put in there with them. Faces would be seen at the portal in the middle of the doors, and the, hands would come out, and they might like write messages from beyond on a slate board. Things like that would happen, and they became pretty well known traveling around. And
Actually, I
soon
want to.
after, yeah, so,
Uh,
go ahead.
so, so, um, So let's touch on that traveling part for a
Mhm.
minute. 'Cause, most people have heard that the Eddy Brothers actually traveled in a circus.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I always get a chuckle when I read that, and I've read that in a lot of different places, both in books and newspaper articles. More modern stuff, internet articles that people have written about them, and yeah, there's just no truth about that. I guess it's an easy way to sort of sum up sort of what was happening, but no. I've seen them described as psychic twins. They were not twins. William and Horatio were born several years apart. Uh, they they did not travel in a circus. They did not travel in a sideshow. They did have a manager. They actually had two or three different managers over the years, and they were fully part of the process, and they were not like some sideshow act. They would come into town. They would have exhibitions at the towns, just like other lecturers of the time. Um, and But nothing like unusual. They weren't traveling around in a circus caravan with sort of like a freak show type thing. That was just a kind of a different time period, and just not at all what they did. And there's no evidence that kind of supports any of that. But I read about that a lot, and I always get a chuckle. I've even seen a photo that was sold on an auction website that's sort of like eBay, and it was advertised as the Eddy Brothers, so, famous psychic mediums, and it was these two little boys that looked identical, same height and everything. It was a black and white photo, but the dead giveaway when I looked at the photo was they were both wearing roller skates, and I was like, yeah, that is not my Eddy Brothers. Those are not the Eddy Brothers that I know. And I did some research, and I think I sent you. There's like an Eddy Brothers circus there was, and there were like a couple of a roller skating performers. Like I forget what year it was, but it was after the Eddy Brothers that we're speaking about, and it just cracks me up. And someone paid some good money for that photo, thinking they got like probably one of the only photos of the Eddy Brothers as children. Um, and that, speaking of children, that's another misconception people have about the Eddies, and it's because of the way Colonel Olcott wrote about them. He always refers to them as the children, and yes, they were children of their parents, like we all are children of our parents. But when they went out on tour, they were adults. They were in their 20s, 30s, and beyond when they were touring. They were not like little children. And the way it reads in the story, and maybe that's the way the Eddies told it at the time to Colonel Olcott, it sounds like, oh, geez, these poor kids, they were just children, and they were being forced into, service to, and the money is going to their father. He sold them off. And that's not really what happened. There's actually no evidence that the Eddies ever toured prior to their father dying. They didn't start touring until after that. And, if someone proves me wrong on that, if they find evidence they traveled before that, I'd love to see it. But I have articles, of when they sort of first came onto the scene and were introduced. But there's nothing prior to that at all. You can read about other psychic mediums, spirit mediums, the Fox sisters, the Davenport brothers in times before the 1860s. But Eddy Brothers, you won't find anything prior to the 1860s. And if anybody does, please let me know. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But it's just, yeah, they were adults when they were traveling, and they didn't really start traveling until after the father died. And getting back to your original, you asked about how the colonel heard about them. So yeah, he read about them. Believe it was in the Banner of Light, and he actually, at the time, talked to the editor of the New York Sun, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to write an article about these guys. I want to go visit them for like a week, and asked if he could get, if the New York Sun would pay for him to do that, and they said sure. And so he spent 5 days in September of August of 1874, and he wrote an article about it, and it was a big sensation. So much so that the New York Daily Graphic said, "Hey, Colonel Olcott, we want you to go back to Chittenden and do an article for us. Except we want you to stay there for 3 months." And really do like a thorough investigation. And they sent him there with an illustrator, and that's kind of what led to the book People from the Other World. He had published a bunch of newspaper articles in the New York Daily Graphic, and then he sort of compiled all those articles and then added additional material, which became probably the most well known piece of work about the Eddies out there today. People from the Other World.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that's also because he brought in like what, electrician, a carpenter,
Right.
and few other people.
Yeah, he
And
got carpenters, architects. He had somebody
oh,
bring in a scale, a Howe scale, I believe the Howe scale out of
yeah, house
Rutland, and
scale from Rutland. Yep.
yeah, and he had them like calibrate it, make sure it was all working right, and then they'd have the spirits step on the scale, and like every time like Honto stepped on it, it was like a different weight. And yeah, it's I love that book. You know, it's just it's so much fun. It's a big thick book. It's just the best material out there on the story. My only complaint about Colonel Olcott's book, I have a lot of questions that we'll never have answers to that I wish he had asked and had written about. Um, and actually, I have another comment about that in a second. But I wish that the book was in a chronological order. But he sort of jumps
Mm.
around in the timeline of telling the backstory of the Eddies, but also telling about an incident that happened on this date. But then the next page, he might be talking about an incident that happened earlier in his investigation, and there's not like a good chronological sequence. He just jumps around too much for my liking. But one of the interesting things that I found about Olcott was that he had kept a whole bunch of notes um, on his visit, things that were never published, because he had to edit it down for the purposes of the book, People from the Other World. And the horrifying thing about all this is that I read that that book was lost, his notebook that had more stuff than what was published. And, I just love to know what was in that notebook that we don't even know about.
Oh
Kills
man.
me. It's probably never, ever, ever going to turn up unless it was like in someone's attic or something, but it's not likely. It was probably lost forever, but kills me.
Yeah, I mean, uh, you know, because of that comment, that reminded me of oh God, lost history. I swear. That's like I always hear about like a good example would be like the Pittsburgh haunted house, right? That used to
Yep.
be the Calvary, and it used to house a patient that used to have tuberculosis. Which that
Hmm.
has a very interesting story, which maybe I'll discuss like at some point. But anyway, because I've heard two different things, and when I really listened to this particular person mention this ghost story, I've heard about two different locations, but they were like so close to each other. It's kind of like wow, like could this have been the same person? But anyway, so I love hearing things about like oh. Well, I remember we had to like break into this building or whatever, right? To like basically clean it all up to get it restored and everything. And then you hear the sad story of oh, there were documents everywhere and this and that, and we picked them all up and we just threw them away. It's
Yep.
like, so you're telling me you just picked up documents of this old place that used to be like a hospital, and you destroyed the only information that we could ever learn about this. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's too bad. Like stuff like that couldn't have been, somehow
Document.
donated to, yeah, or donated to the Vermont Historical Society or the Vermont State Archives. There's, just different places that could have maybe gone to, but of course they have limitations on, they can't keep everything. But yeah, I totally get it. It's just, yeah, it kills me when you hear about that kind of history that's just lost forever, but it's also a lot of work. Like if, even if they said, okay, we can't keep it physically, but maybe we can digitize it, it's still a ton of work. But still, maybe there's somebody who would do it. There's a lot of like genealogical societies that do like volunteer like digitizing and stuff, and they go into like old church records and they're starting to digitize all the old baptism records, things like that, which is just amazing, and they do it for free, just to as a service to the public. And yeah, I'd love to see them do something like that in a case like you just described.
Oh my god, I heard that about the Pittsburgh haunted house and like another place that, and it just saddened me. It's like, are you like I could only imagine the information you could have learned and
Yeah.
like
Yep.
everything, and like not only that, but like you know how we always say proof is better to basically put the bullseye into the story. Put it down into like this is the hard evidence to
Hmm.
basically say this is not a ghost story. Or
Right.
whatever.
Yep.
So like this is the perfect example, I guess, for this story, right? And I'll just say it here, even though it's a little bit off topic to the Eddie, but this is just to also prove a point of what I was just saying of lost information and what Jason was saying. Is so the two ghost stories I've heard is coincidentally the Pittsford Haunted House and the Pittsford Police Academy. You might have heard of this story, maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And for the listeners, basically, is like, so we hear that the Pittsford Haunted House one back in its prime of the Calvary being hospitalized with the sick patients, like I was mentioning, there was a nurse named Mary who took care of the kids and everything, and somehow caught the dreadful disease and died. So then, let's go back to the Pittsford Police Academy, which unfortunately I don't remember what it was called at that time. But anyway, supposedly there was a nurse there, so if I had to guess, this was probably part of the Calvary back in the day. But anyway, there was a nurse there by the name Mary who uh, mysteriously died or whatever, but she used to help patients. And one of the ghost stories was supposedly if you were able to go into the police academy, you weren't feeling good and you had to go lie down or something. Supposedly the ghost story is you would wake up and there's like a cup of water and like maybe some medicine right by your side, and that mysteriously just appeared. And and after I heard somebody say that, it's almost like, well, could this Mary over here be the same Mary as Pittsford Haunted House?
Yeah.
We won't know though, because the document is now forever lost.
Yep.
But it's now a ghost story.
Right.
What a shame, though. So what you were saying? Let's go back to what you were saying. But you were trying to continue the traveling expeditions, I think.
Yeah. So the Eddies, they did their exhibitions with the Spirit Cabinet, and eventually, well, one of their sisters, Miranda, when she died, the spirits allegedly told the family that now William. Well, so Miranda was said to be the most powerful medium in the family, their older sister, but she. It's funny, we don't, even though they say she was the most powerful, there's not a lot written about Miranda. So when she died, the spirits allegedly said to the family, William's now going to be the most powerful medium of all, and we don't want you, we the spirits don't want you to go out and do these exhibitions anymore. So they said now, the exhibitions are going to happen right at the house. So you're going to come back to Chittenden, and you're going to um, open up you create a room just for circles, the circle room as it's known, and you're going to do seances there, and you're going to have new miracles are going to happen, new types of circles. So instead of the light circles and the dark circles that they had been doing, they were now going to have this materialization circle where full-bodied physical beings would appear, and that's what really differentiates the Eddies from like all the other psychic or spirit mediums of the time, like the Fox sisters and the Davenport brothers, and lots of other ones that were around, but those are probably the more well-known ones. But no one else had this sort of claim to fame, and that's what people came from all over to see. They wanted to see and hear their departed loved ones, friends, family who had died, and not just get a message through a medium. They wanted to see the spirit in the physical form, and that's what supposedly they could do. So that's what makes it such a great story.
And I want to touch on that too, which go back to Henry when he came back
Mm-hmm.
in for the 3 months. Let's look at that one piece of we'll just say evidence right now, just for the
Mm-hmm.
lack of better wording, which is I love what he did. And if people could understand the power of powder or sugar or flour, like we dump it, and what's going to happen if you move? It goes everywhere. It's gonna get footprints, handprints, whatever. You're gonna show signs of movement, and that's exactly what Henry did when William went into the spirit cabinet. After they were tied, his hands were tied in a knot and stuff, they poured like flour or some type of powdered ingredient, so that way uh, Henry could be like, "Ha ha, I got you." But when they reopened up the cabinet after the science was done, seance, I mean, seance is, and he opened up the door, and the flour was still where they basically poured it on him. So it's almost like he didn't move.
Yeah, well, there's a couple pieces to that. One, I don't remember any specific story about Colonel Olcott doing any sort of powder test on William, but I know that, and also I don't think that they were tied up when they were doing the circles. At the seances at the house in the 1870s. Now, prior to that, when they did these exhibitions, yeah, some audience members, did some pretty interesting things. You look at like the sketches in Colonel Olcott's book of like the different ways they were tied up, because they would do these exhibitions in public, at these town halls, but they also did some private ones at people's homes. And in the book, you can see, they're like tied to the bed in these weird positions, or they're like tied to a cross, or like they'd have a dowel tied in their mouth to try to prevent like ventriloquism. And there was actually at least one instance where there was an audience member who took some, basically it was called lamp black, and they put it on the instruments in the spirit cabinet with the brothers who were tied up. And they did this trying to catch the Eddy brothers in the act of, deception or fraud. And sure enough, in at least one instance, when the doors were closed, the instruments were in there, the music was played, even though the brothers were tied up, and they opened up those doors and they found the lamp black on the hands of the Eddy brothers. So the implication there was that had to be the Eddy's hands who were playing the instruments. So they were kind of thrown out of town on that one. And there's at least one other very similar instance to that I've read as well. So, and Colonel Olcott does address this in his book that, there were times when they were caught like sort of cheating and not being like true mediums, which is interesting because he still believed, at the end of his 3-month visit, the Colonel believed that their materialization circle, he felt that was the real deal. But some of the other stuff, like the other types of circles or seances that they did where they were tied up, he felt that was kind of more tricks, basically illusions. So it's interesting. And I always say, well, why would people, if they were caught in the act doing fraudulent mediumship, then a lot of people say, why would people keep going to see them at these exhibitions, or why would they pay money to go stay at their house in Chittenden if they had been caught in the act like 10 years before? And I always say, you know what? It's because they didn't have the internet. I laugh, but I'm being totally serious, because like today, it'd be all over Twitter, like, oh, these fake mediums or whatever, and no one would ever go see them. But even that's not true, because, there are mediums out there today. I won't name any of them, but some of them may not be the real deal, but they're very well known though. And there are people who are very active skeptics who are like going in with fake names to these, like, the mediums will host like big events, like they have their own like TV shows and stuff, but then they'll host like big events at like hotels and charge a lot of money, and people go to see them. And some of these skeptics go in there, in disguise and under different names, and they basically catch the mediums in the act of fakery, absolute fakery. And what's funny is they'll publish this in different magazines like Skeptical Inquirer and stuff like that. People still keep going to them. They still keep watching their TV shows, and they'll still keep calling the 800 number or whatever, and keep dishing out the money, even though that some of these people have been caught in the act of fraud.
Well, that's what
Now, I'm
they.
not saying all. I was just gonna say I'm not saying all mediums are frauds. I think there actually might be some real ones out there. I really do, but yeah, who knows?
But that's like saying, like, look at the people that watch, WWE. They know it's fake, but they still watch it.
Yeah.
It's the entertainment factor, and I think that's why these people do that. It's just the entertainment factor.
Yeah, and I think, like even today, just like back then in the 1800s, like people have like a yearning to know what is beyond this life, if anything, right? Like and I think most people have a hope that there is something beyond this life, and being able to learn more about what that is, or maybe being able to speak to like their deceased loved ones, like maybe there's a message they wish they had been able to say to that person when they were alive, or maybe there's some message they're really hoping they'll get from that person who had died. Yeah, I get it. I've had people in my family who've passed away, and geez, I'd give anything to be able to talk to them again, and I can understand it. And it was that way back in the 1800s, and I think it's still that way today. People are fascinated by the possibility.
Exactly. And to quote this newspaper from the Burlington Free Press that was published on Halloween of 1976, there's a part that says they called it the Green Tavern and business
Mm.
thrived. For a mere $10 a week, guests could have the run of the inn and watch the nightly seances that called up the dead.
Yeah, and I think that's the exact article I was talking about. I think that's the earliest reference that I've seen mentioning Green Tavern. I don't think I've seen any reference prior to that article you just mentioned. And there's another thing that kind of gets thrown out there from time to time, and I've even caught myself using this phrase. Some
Oh,
people say, Chittenden is the spirit capital of the universe. That's a pretty popular phrase, and I've used it. I know other people have written that in different books and things, but that's another phrase that I think only originated in like the 70s. I think I forget the author's name, but there was like a collection of Vermont stories or New England stories done in the 70s. It might have been Mysterious New England, and the guy who wrote the piece about the Eddies in that book, I believe, referred to. Like, I think the title of the section on the Eddies was "Spirit Capital of the Universe," and I don't think I've ever seen an earlier reference using that phrase. So I think he's the one who came up with that. But Spirit Vale, that phrase, that goes back to 1873, 1874, and that'll be the title of my second book
ooh.
someday.
Yeah, and I know I've used that before, but I've heard that thrown around so many times that I think it was just one of those like, oh, okay, well that makes sense in a way from like what Henry has thrown together within the 3 months. And just a quote from the last bit of People from the Other World, and I quote, and over all there hung a shade of fear, a sense of mystery, the spirit daunted, and said as plain as whisper in the ear, the place is haunted.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jason, I mean, probably keep going, but I mean, it's amazing though. We went into Henry's experience. We went into like the idea of yours and everything, and you know, um, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like there's so much more we can do. So we'll definitely maybe have to come back on, or have you come back on so we can talk more for sure. And I don't know. I mean, this is just always an interesting topic, and I just hope that people enjoyed like what we've also shared. And I just don't know. I mean, is there anything else that you feel like we should add to this before we feel like we need to, you know, I think put a bookmark in place until next.
Yeah, well, a couple things. Number one, yeah, absolutely would talk with you again. Anytime about the Eddies. I think I told you before. It's for me. It really is a story that never gets old. I love talking about it. I love telling people about it. I love hearing about it. I love researching it. And you know, I think that whether people believe that the Eddies were real spirit mediums, or if they believe they were fakes, if they were just basically illusionists or tricksters, regardless of how you feel about it, I think it's tough to argue that it's a fun story. It's just a really fun one, and to think that if they were fake, then they duped a lot of people. People came from all over to visit them, and there are people who swore that they saw and spoke with, in some instances, spoke with their departed loved ones, and they insist that it was real. And then there are others who, went to these circles and they said, no, it was too dark in there. Whatever physical bodies were coming out of that cabinet or closet at the Eddy house, that was all William in disguise, or it was his brothers and sisters or some other Confederates, accomplices in disguise. So, it's tough because we weren't there. There's no video or photos taken during the seances, and what I wouldn't give to be able to go back in time to actually be at one of those seances. That would just be amazing. But either way, it's just a fun story. And if they were real, well, that makes it even more amazing.
And if they were real, we have documents again with people from the other world, right? With Henry, he was trying to use the ruler to
Hmm.
measure the heights.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that's amazing about what Olcott did. I mean, it really was, in my opinion, like unprecedented at the time. There were people who wrote whole books on the modern American spiritualism and other things at that time. There were books published, but in terms of like a full on ghost hunting investigation, I mean, it's hard to
I
beat
loved
what
it.
what he did. I mean, he stayed there, way longer than like modern day, ghost hunters on the Travel Channel or something like that. I mean, he stayed there for 3 months. Can you imagine that? And and to not walk away like after 2 days and be like, yeah, these guys are fake. But
Yeah,
to spend that whole time there, I mean, and he did so much what he accomplished in terms of, yeah, like you said, measuring the height of the ghost.
yeah,
He measured the weight. He recorded like over, I don't know, between like 250 or to 400 different
400. I
uh,
want to say.
yeah, yeah, and unique entities or physical beings, and he wrote down the names if they were given, the height, the weight, the physical description, and he got like testimony from people, architects, carpenters who came in and looked for trapdoors and tried to find any sort of way that the Eddies were, hiding costumes or hiding people, to become these spirits. It just it's pretty wild. It was quite an accomplishment, and yeah, it's fun to talk about.
I can't remember the lady that he would use as the reference because I think she was supposed to be the one of the sisters. I want to say she was shorter than Horatio. I want to say is who he measured. It was either Horatio or William. I forget right now because don't. I did not. That was one of the pages I forgot to bookmark. But basically, the illustrator drew like 4 panels, but he
Hmm.
like kind of did it by this one lady just to show the difference in the height between either Horatio, William, Maggie, I think. I think it was Maggie. Um,
Well, I
but
know. Yeah, I know the some of the sketches. And there's quite a few of them in there. Like, yeah, I know he's got like back to back. He's got like Honto with her back to
yeah, yeah, that's what it
yeah,
was.
to Mrs. Cleveland, who was a neighbor, and she was one of the few people that the Eddy family allowed to go up on the platform at the house and actually be right next to the spirit. And yeah, they would have her stand back to back, and the Colonel was allowed to measure them, and he did measure both William and Horatio to try to see, like, if it could be one of
If it
them,
was the
like
same
dressed
one,
up.
yeah,
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 yeah. So
yeah,
yeah, it's pretty cool. He did a lot of interesting things for that time,
yeah.
to try to debunk it or prove it true.
Yeah, and it's like we were saying, like the amount of stuff that he really tried to do to really debunk these guys, because that's what his mission was, right? Like he
Hmm.
really wanted to try to debunk these guys, and at the end of the day, even the carpenters that he had were basically saying like, we can't figure it out because there's no trapdoors, there was no this or that, so had to been real.
Yeah, and the Colonel, he said he did go into it. He tried to, as much as possible, go into it with an open mind and not assume, because he had heard like that maybe the Eddies had been caught in the act and they had been arrested before, and there was even an instance where they exposed themselves, meaning. After getting caught in the act a couple times, they ended up giving a show, like an exhibition, showing how they did some of their sort of medium tricks, like with ropes and things. But then later they said, well, no, that's we actually just did that because we needed some money, but we are real mediums. So who knows?
Oh, I think this might help too for anybody interested. There is an article from a newspaper from Rutland Daily Herald. It was originally published on the 11th of August, 1875, where supposedly that's the article where the Eddy brothers were known as a fraud.
Yeah, there's a few articles that call them out as frauds, and what's fun about those articles too is usually like shortly after an article would be published saying that they were frauds, is usually Horatio, sometimes Mary, would write a response back in like a letter she'd asked to have published in the paper, where she would Horatio or Mary would challenge people and say, no, we're not frauds, we'll pay, well, you come on down and you find some, how we're doing this, you say it's a trick, well, why don't you come on down, we'll give you $1,000 if you can prove it's a trick. And there's actually no evidence of any takers on those challenges, but they are documented that they did challenge more than one person to come and prove it. There are people who said, oh, yeah, they did have a trap door, and they said, no, we don't, come on down for yourself and we'll prove it. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's always going to be one of those mysterious ones, I think. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the fun thing is I do have some answers to some of these mysteries, but they're going to have to wait till they come out in the book.
Uh-oh. I was gonna say, I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say until next time, but yeah, that works too. Uh, well, okay, so to start to wrap things up here, Jason. So, quick
Yeah.
question is, so for those listening that are wondering, as far as I know, and I know you told me that yourself, but so what is the idea or game plan that you actually have before releasing like the first book and et cetera and et cetera? Like, I guess what are you waiting for now?
Thank you for asking that question, actually. So here's the deal. I was originally going to publish this book in 2020, and there were still a few things I really, really, really need to, some places I need to visit in person to get some additional information to fill in a couple holes that I have in the story of the Eddies. And they're really important because here's what I don't want to do. I'm someone who I don't want to publish something, half done, to use a polite term. um, and I feel it would be a disservice to myself first, but also to anyone reading the story if I publish it and then knowing that there's some stuff I still need, that I know is out there. And then I turn around and like 2 years later publish like a second edition, revised, expanded, special edition, now with more footage, you know. And I don't want to do that to people. Like I don't want to like just keep adding on to the story, and then have people like, oh man, well, it's too bad you didn't have the information in the first release of that volume. So it's been important to me because there's some essential parts of the story that I know about already, just that have been hinted at in different documentation, and I'm trying to find the missing pieces, basically. And I had really hoped to be able to visit these places in person to get that documentation to because it's not stuff that's available online, the stuff I'm looking for. And the pandemic really killed that for me, not being able to go to some of these places in person. And that was 2 years ago, and only now are things just starting to kind of open back up. And the other piece of it is, when I do publish this thing, it's going to be a big deal, like for me personally, even though I'm not Stephen King. I'm not going to have like some bestseller New York Times type thing, but I want to celebrate it, and I want to do it right. Like I'd like to go down to Chittenden and have like
Mm.
the book launch be in Chittenden. Maybe it's at the lodge, or maybe it's at the Chittenden Public Library, or maybe it's at the Chittenden Historical Society. Or I know every August they do I forget what it's called. It's like Chittenden Day or something like that, where they just celebrate the town, sort of a town celebration. And I think it's every August. And they didn't have that for 1 or 2 years because of the pandemic. But I think they might have just started doing it again this past August. I'm not sure, but so my point is, like, I really want to make a big deal of this, and if I do it through Amazon, I'd probably buy a bunch of copies to have on hand for myself to sell. And I just bring down boxes of books in the back of my car, set up a little table, and hopefully just celebrate it. And I'd love to do it in Chittenden. Everybody down there, not just the lodge, but the historical society, the library. So many people I've talked to just with great stories and just great people. And I feel like the town deserves to have that celebration as well. And I know a lot of people at the historical society, they were some of the first ones who were like, oh, I can't go to this speech, but is he going to be publishing a book? Because I'd buy it. And they hadn't even heard the speech. And then the people who did hear the speech were like, oh, I'd buy it too. So I'm like, I'm probably not going to make any money on this, but maybe I could kind of help spread like the truth about the Eddies, or at least as
That
true
would
as
be
we
good.
can find it, based on the documentation that does exist. There's some things we're never going to know; they're just lost in time. Like we talked about all the history that's lost or thrown out, but there's a lot of information that is out there that's never been published. And I feel like it should be shared. At a minimum, there are modern day descendants of some of the Eddies, not of William and Horatio, but some of their brothers and sisters did have children. And there's descendants today that I've met and talked to and shared stories with, and some of the stories and information I have, they don't even have, like, so some of their own descendants. And I feel like, geez, I feel selfish like not at least sharing it with them. So putting it in book format for everyone to enjoy, I think, is like the best way to kind of get the word out there, and get the most accurate word. It kind of goes back to what I said about when I was writing the screenplay, that I wanted the most accurate version of the story. There's plenty of people who have written about the Eddies, but then when I look at where they got their material from, I'm like, you got this from somebody else who didn't get it right. Like they heard a story, but they didn't actually cite it with like a newspaper article or some sort of historical document, like a birth record or whatever. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to get the word out there and clear up some of the inaccuracies, and there's more to the story. There's so much more that's never been written about. We haven't talked about tonight. There's a lot more to it. Some of the things that were going on that inside that family, separate from all the spirit stuff. There's just a lot of good story, and it's an American story. It's a Vermont story. It needs to be shared with the world.
All right, Jason. Well, I appreciate it. And before I give you the last question, since this is a paranormal talk and stuff, and so my question to you is, what is your take on the whole paranormal, or as people would call cryptids and stuff? So, what is your input on how you look at the unknown?
Oh boy, how much more time do we have? So, yeah, I could talk about this for a long time, but let me tell you this. I'll tell you two stories, and I have more. I have two stories that are, I guess, they're of interest. Let's just say. So they're the reasons I can't, ever say, oh, I don't believe in the unknown, or these paranormal things. So the first story I'll share with you, and like I have several. They're when I said earlier that I don't think all mediums are frauds. I did talk to a medium once, and it was about my deceased father. But here's the crazy thing: I didn't speak to her. My wife spoke to this medium about something else, and I said to my wife, I said, "Well, I know this is your session with this medium." I said, but if you have time, see if some message comes through for me from my father, if anything at all. And so she went to this session, and she came back and told me about her experience with the medium. And I said, did any message come through from my father? Did you even get a chance to ask? And she said, oh yeah, actually, the medium did say that the tingling that you're getting in the three fingers on your right hand, it's not a heart attack. It's an issue with your neck, like specific vertebrae that were, I forget, they weren't aligned properly, or some, I forget what it was. But here's the kicker. This was at a time, we weren't like on Facebook. We weren't, this medium, we had no prior contact with her. She didn't have my name. There was no way she could have known, who my father was, when he died, and none of that matters. Here's the thing that matters. Because let's say somehow she got my wife's name right from this, because she was actually part of it, like a bigger group of people. Well, let's say she got my wife's name, and then this medium, and then she did some research and found the obituary of me, because this medium had no way of knowing my wife was going to ask for a message from my father. So anyway, long story short, she said, tell Jason that his father says don't worry about the tingling, and I had been getting this tingling in these three fingers, and I hadn't told anybody, not even my wife. So this medium somehow knew that. Either she has some kind of amazing guesswork and was able to be that specific, or she's psychic and could somehow read my mind through my wife, or she spoke with someone from the other side. I mean, it was too spot on. And for me, I'm pretty much of a skeptic. And so to be that specific, because later I did go to a doctor, and yeah, there were some issues in my neck. I went to a neurologist, and they did some tests, and that was causing the numbness, because I was worried I was like about to have a heart attack or something. Right. And I was younger then too. So it's not like that the medium could have said, this, my wife, she's older, so her husband probably has like some heart issues or something. There's no way she could have even guessed that. It was just that spot on specific. And again, my wife didn't even know I was getting the tingling. So that was, gave me chills. I was like, that's pretty impressive. Now, the other story I'll tell real quick, and this is actually in Joe Citro's most recent book, the new version of the Vermont Ghost Guide, which you just talked about. Now, this is the version with Robert as the illustrator. So I told a story to Joe, and he published it in the book. So one time, my wife and daughter and I were coming back, and I think one of my wife's nephews, we were coming back from Lake George. We had gone to Great Escape. We were driving home. It was late at night. We were coming through Benson and Orwell. It was like Vermont 20A, I think is the road. And it's, again, I don't know what time of night it was, but it was really dark. It was late night. We're driving home. And up ahead, everyone else is asleep in the car, except for me. Thankfully, right? Because I'm driving. And I'm not sleepy at all, though, right? I'm driving, and I see something almost glowing on the side of the road. Now I'm in my lane. This is not to the right of me. This is to the left. So it's on the other side of the road, kind of almost in like the ditch, but it's right along, really close to the road. Something's glowing, luminous. And as I'm driving closer, my lights are shining on this thing. And my first thought is, oh, there's like a dog or something in the road, or right next to the road. But as I get closer, I see that it's a person crawling on the road. And my first thought, after thinking it was a dog, but now realizing this is a person crawling on the side of the road, my next thought is, that guy must be drunk. Like, what is he doing? He's obviously drunk. He's like, can't even walk. He's crawling on the side of the road. Well, the farther I'm driving, I start getting worried. I'm like, wait a minute. There's no cars anywhere near here. There's not like a car parked on the side of the road. There's not a car in the ditch that I know of. Where did this guy come from? Because for anybody who's driven on Vermont 22A in Benson and Orwell, right in that area, there's a lot of farms. There's a lot of spaces between the houses. It can be pretty dark on a night when there's no moon and the stars aren't out. You got your headlights and that's about it. To top all that off, the people who drive on that road can drive really fast, especially some of the big trucks, right? The 18-wheelers, and they're like on my tail. So as I'm driving, I'm starting to get more and more worried. I'm like, oh my God, what if somebody got in an accident and they needed help and it's not a drunk person? I'm like, I got to go back. While this is going on, I realized that my wife had woken up right then, and she had seen something. She saw something kind of glowing, but she didn't know what it was, because I was like, did you guys just see that? And they were like, I saw something glowing, and the kids in the back saw something. So, but they didn't see the detail that I saw. Like, I saw a person. They couldn't tell you, yes, I saw a person, but they say they saw something glowing. I saw a person crawling, and one hand was over their face like this. So that got me thinking, again, I'm like driving, I'm getting worried. I'm like, I got to go back, maybe that person's drunk, but maybe they got in an accident. Maybe they like flew right through the windshield, hit their face, like, and they need help. So there's no easy place to turn around on Vermont 22A because you don't know where the roads are off of that. And I got traffic behind me, like right on my tail flying. So it took me like a few miles to find a good spot where I could turn around, go back that way. Well, sure enough, drive back that way, nobody to be found. There's no, I driving. I don't find anybody on the side of the road. I'm looking, I'm worried, and I drove to a point where I knew I'd driven past where I saw this guy, and I was like, well, that's weird. I'm like, well, maybe they got picked up. Maybe I know I saw something, right? But I don't know what it was, who they were, what had happened. All I know is it bothered me enough where that night I got home, I started looking on WCAX.com. I started looking on BurlingtonFreePress.com. I was trying to see, like, was there an accident that night? The next day, I did the same thing. Nothing. Now, years later, I never found any proof that there was an accident that night. Nothing like that. But years later, I'm driving through Benson again, and it's during the day. Now, there's a part in Benson as you're driving, on your way, let's say, to New York, and on the right, there's a gravestone right, like on the side of the road. It's so bizarre. There's not a cemetery. There's no graveyard. There's just a single memorial marker right on the side of the road. And I had remembered seeing that before, and I always thought it was weird. But then I made the connection. I'm like, well, that's weird. This isn't far from where I saw that crawling man. So one day, a different day, we drove by there again. I'm like, you know what? We need to stop and I need to see what's on that gravestone. So we got a picture of it, and I did a little bit of research. I looked online. I found a death record for someone who had died there. I forget what year it was. It was more recently, like in the, I don't know, 80s or something. And there's a person who died, and there was a newspaper article, and I saw the death certificate. There's a person who died in a car crash very close to where I saw, not the exact spot, but it was very close to where I saw the crawling man. And I have to wonder if it could possibly be that person who died in the car crash. But I had no knowledge that somebody had died near that spot. Nothing prior to that until I started really digging. And it was a wild story, and I told it to Joe, and he put it in his most recent book. And it's funny. I also talked to somebody at one of my speeches I did on the Eddies, and he was from the Benson area, or I think he lived in Orwell. And he was a teacher. When I told that story, he's like, "Oh my God." He's like, that same thing. A friend of mine saw the same thing. So I was like, whoa, okay, maybe there's something to this. Like maybe I've driven by that spot several times in the years since then, never seen it again. But I always hope I will, but I never do.
Man, that sounds almost like a residual haunting then. I mean,
Yeah.
it's in itself. So if he was crawling, maybe he was injured so bad that he was trying to crawl to get help. And
Yeah.
just for people that are listening, so when Jason just said he had his hand like this, so basically imagine yourself putting your hand on your forehead like you're trying to block the sun, and basically that's what Jason was trying
Exactly.
to.
Like I couldn't see his face. His hand, the back of his hand was towards me, and his palm of his hand was covering like his eyes, like his whole face. I never saw a face. I just saw a person crawling on their hands and knees with one hand on the face, and just it was luminous. That was the other weird thing. It wasn't a rainy night, but somehow, it seemed more bright than you would expect, like your lights shining on something. It just seemed a little more luminous. So it wasn't see-through, but it was bright. It was just weird. And
Wow.
every time I drive through Benson and Orwell, I'm always looking back to my wife and my daughter, and I'm like, oh, here's the spot, get ready, but we never see it. I'm always hoping I do, though.
Maybe try going under a full moon, and maybe around the time, or maybe around the time in the day that supposedly the crash happened, you might get lucky.
I had that thought actually. I thought to go there on the exact anniversary of the death and see if maybe I could see it. But yeah, I haven't tried that yet. But maybe someday.
Yeah, and so I wanna share a story now because you just said Route 22A, and it's just the same area that I'm thinking of. It's the small little town where basically, um, oh god, this is horrible. I can't even remember the year now. It was either 2009, 2010 when the small stream like basically wiped out that town. It like
Mm.
over flooded and basically like tore through that town. Anyway, so if it's the same town, I do remember Route 22A when I was doing traffic control. And one day when I was doing traffic control, it was clear blue sky, and I just remember staring up into the sky, and I just see like this. Best way to describe it because it was quite a distance away in the sky for sure, but it was like this black object, and it was not moving at all. It was just staying put. And so I'm just like not thinking of anything, and I'm like, okay, this thing has not moved because if it was like possibly a like a drone, like somebody using like a drone to maybe film from up in the sky, it should have been moving all over the place. And we have been like not staying in the same spot for so long or something. So anyway, I radio my partner, and I'm like, just by chance, do you see that up there? Like, do you see anything weird in the sky? And of course, he couldn't see what I was talking about.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, when we get a chance, if it's still there, because I was hoping it was just gonna move off and like be gone, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. But no, it stayed there. And what I found very odd about this is that once my partner came to me and I pointed right at it and said, "You don't see that right there." And as I said right there, that's when it started to move. And I'm like, did I just see a UFO? Was that a drone? Like, what was that? And because it was so weird. It seemed to have picked up speed and everything. But I mean, my mind wants to say UFO, but part of me wants to say drone. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like the two stories I just told you. You know, I can't say with 100% certainty, like, yep, that was a real psychic spirit medium, uh, and I can't say I absolutely saw a ghost. I can't say for sure those two things. All I can say is this is what I saw. This is what I heard. I can't explain it. It's like the X Files, right? With this poster, Duchovny, Fox Mulder's poster on the wall. I want to believe, but I can't. I need like I almost need more proof. But boy, those are pretty close to full proof for me.
No, I agree. So anyway, Jason, I don't want to take up any more time. I also want to thank the listeners if they're still listening too, because I mean,
Yeah,
it's
you may have to split this into two episodes.
yeah, maybe we should, but um, anyway, so before we let you go, if anybody wanted to keep up to date with what's going on with you, where can people, keep track of your progress?
Yeah, so there's two places to kind of keep track. Probably the most active place I would say, although it's not super active lately, is on Facebook. I do have a group. It's not a page; it's a group called the Eddy Brothers Spirit Mediums of Chittenden, Vermont. It's a public group on Facebook. There's I don't know 160 people or something in it, 165, something like that. And it gets a little more lively, this group, around Halloween time. So people start thinking about spooky things, and conversation comes up about the Eddies again. Usually I'm doing some sort of speech when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. I'll be doing speeches at libraries and historical societies, so definitely get a lot more active around that time. But people can chime in that group anytime they want to talk about the Eddies. I'm always open to talking about it. So there's that Facebook page. I also have a website. It's just under my name, jasonsmiley.com. That's JASONSMILEY.com. I'm not super great about keeping that page updated. In fact, I think you saw the other day the page was actually down because I hadn't renewed like the security certificate or something. So I went in and fixed that, so you can actually go to the page now and it's live again. But you'll go on there and you'll maybe click on a link, and the page there might not be anything on a particular page. But I hope to do more with it, as I get closer to releasing the book. I'll try to update the website more frequently. And getting back to your question about when's the book going to come out, what's the plan? Now that the pandemic, things are getting a little bit better. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to get out there and get those last pieces I really want to get that first book out. And here's the cool thing, though, is I've actually done work on all 3 books, because originally it was going to be just 1 book. But when I realized how big of a project this was, I was like, I need to split this up. So there's been work done on all of the different time periods of the books. And so I'll be, I've already got 3 different documents on my hard drive with, the 3 different books all going on. But I'm focused on getting that first book out. So that I've kind of separated it out and said, okay, I'm not going to work on anything beyond this date. I'm going to focus on these years of the Eddy Brothers. So, I hesitate to commit to a specific date on the release of the book, because I don't want to let people down, and I don't want to let myself down and be like, oh yeah, it's going to be out in August, and then August comes and it's still not ready, and I'm going to be like, ugh, I let myself down. I let people down who are waiting. So I'm not going to, throw a date out there yet, but just know that it's almost ready to go. It's so close. There's really just like 3 or 4 things I need to track down, because they're just such big parts of the story, and I've just got little snippets about it, but I need a little more content, and I don't want to put it out there until that's ready. So hang in there, people. It is being worked on. There's a huge chunk of it that's done. There's just like a few little things I need to wrap up to get that first one out. And then the next 2 should come much quicker, because I've already done a lot of the work on those. The third one might take a little longer, because I haven't done as much work on collecting modern stories about things in Chittenden and related to the Eddys, but we'll get there. The first 2 will be the big focus, though. So the first one's The Devil's Cabinet. The second one is Spirit Vale, and they're coming. They're coming.
And then
It's the best 2 places. What's that? The third one? I haven't 100% decided on the name, but the one title I may use is A Skeptic Among Spirits. Houdini wrote a book called A Magician Among the Spirits, and there's another book out there called A Southerner Among the Spirits, and I kind of like those names, and I thought it'd be cool. The spirits, because I am skeptical. Again, I want to believe. So yeah, I may use that title, but we'll see. We'll see, unless I can come up with something more clever.
I actually like that. I would stay with that, because a lot of people are skeptic. So it'd be a good way to basically say, well, what do you believe? After reading whatever
right.
is.
And that's kind of the way I'm doing it. Yeah. The material I'm putting into the book of everything. It's a mix of people who believe the Eddys were real, and also people who thought they were fake. So you're going to get both sides of it in both of those first books, and people can make up their own mind. I'm not going to say, well, this is what happened for sure, and anything else is wrong. I think it's open to interpretation, and I've when I do my speeches, sometimes I put all this information out there, and then at the end I'll ask people, so after the story I've told, how many of you believe and how many of you don't believe? And a lot of people don't change their mind. Even if you say, well, the Eddys were caught in the act a couple times, it doesn't sway them. They still think they were real, and that's totally fine. I'm not going to say, like I said before, I'm not going to knock them for believing that, because we've all, many of us at least, have experienced some different things that we just can't explain, and we'll probably never know for sure, because their Eddys are long gone. They're not here to defend themselves. They're not here to say, oh, you don't believe us? Come on down. We'll challenge you. We'll give you $1,000 if you can prove there's a trapdoor into the spirit cabinet.
Well, who knows, man? I mean, we could always just go to where they're buried and maybe ask a question and maybe get something in a response back in a recording.
You never know.
Never know. Anyway, Jason, it was a pleasure to talk to you. And
you too, Paul.
I'll say it again. You're welcome to come back on anytime. And when your books are finally out, we need to definitely discuss them, because I'd love to figure out more stuff. Maybe like give us a taste of, or at least give the listeners a taste of maybe some little juicy details that are not really out in the public that can really maybe be eye-opening just a little bit.
Definitely, yeah. I'll definitely let you know when we're ready to publish, and we can definitely get back together and chat about it. That'd be fun.
Oh, it will be, and it doesn't even feel like we've been talking for 2 hours, to be honest. So, I feel like we've only scratched the surface, not even a little.
It's
So,
true.
all right, man. Well, thank you so much for joining, and for the listeners. So, as Jason just said, please check out jasonsmiley.com, and he also has a Facebook group, which I will drop both the links into the description below, so that way I did all the work. You don't have to do it anyway. So it will be all there. All you got to do is go to the description, click on the link, and then boom, it will be right there. So anyway, my name is Paul Doski. You just listened to Jason Smiley, and well, if you happen to have your eyes open, there might be a chance that an apparition might appear in front of you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.